I'm Mark Boris, and this is Straight Talk.
Josh Szeps, welcome back, mate. Straight
Hello,
Talk.
mate.
Good to see you.
So good to be back. I can't believe you were just complimenting me on how nice my skin looks.
Mate,
That's the best way to start the day.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
But
I don't even
this-
have I don't have a regime. I don't have a skin regime.
I can't believe it. I can't. I actually have to tell everybody that I saw him loitering around the area just outside there. He did have a suit. He had a suit bag and he's going to put a suit on for the show. But I said, mate, don't worry. You look great the way it is.
To correct the record, I'm flying to Melbourne right after this, and I'm hosting a panel event for which I need a suit. That's not to say that this show isn't important enough to put a suit on for.
I felt important.
But I just feel like your vibe is more informal. I mean, what are we doing, Mark? I'm not
Well,
sure.
it is informal. That's
I feel
what I
like
want
I'd
to
intimidate you if I was wearing a suit.
Well, I want to talk to you about that formal vibe, and I want to talk to you about intimidation too today. They're the things. They're the topics I want to talk to you about.
Great. Stumbled right into
I'm
it.
reaching out to Josh because he's my mate, but he also knows a lot of stuff. And of course, Uncomfortable Conversations. That's your podcast, and you've written an article recently, which I'll park, but I want to talk about a little bit later. You've written lots of articles, but one I want to talk about in particular is about your grandmother. And just to give you some background, like we do in this show, there was a lot of military activity around the world, and I got in Major General Mclachlan to talk about what's going on around the world, particularly in relation to, this was straight after USA dropped the big bomb into Iran, and I thought it was a relevant discussion, and Mick was sort of praising the Israelis, so it fits back into your wheelhouse, but praising the Israelis for their military work. I don't think he's praising Israel for its general policies relative to the rest of the world.
Sensitivity, perhaps.
Yeah. And then I had a guy called Chris Joy, who I consider to be the best economist in the country from an Australian economics point of view. And Chris is also talking about Trump, and he was also praising Israel relative to Trump, relative to world economics. In other words, the effect of what both regimes are doing in terms of how it bleeds into his economic policy, his own policy relative to what he invests in. He's not saying
do you buy that, incidentally, the pro-Trump tariff argument, just as a quick aside?
Not really. I don't buy it. Okay. But from his point of view, he manipulates. He has he's built AI, and he's got a team of 45 PhDs who basically build probability events relative to global bonds based on Trump's demeanor, his facial demeanor,
right, okay.
his words, and they predicted the Iran bomb was going to happen on the Saturday or the Sunday, whenever it happened. So on the back of that, they're going to buy and sell. So they build up events, global events, relative to...
And then they short or long something, depending on what they think is going to happen. Right.
And they don't always get it right, but generally speaking, this is all about return to their
Sure.
investors.
I mean, that's fine if you have a 12-hour time frame where you want to make money. It's probably not fine if you're looking at a 5 to 10 to 50-year time frame of whether or not markets have confidence in the United States and in the integrity of its currency and so on and so
Correct.
forth. Like
It's a trade.
Uncertain tariff wars is probably not wise if you want to remain the number one.
It's
top
arbitrage.
dog.
It's basic arbitrage, running a basis point. So they go buy many billions of dollars worth of US bonds or Australian bonds, whatever it is, and they'll...
I mean, look, people made a ton of money after 9/11 as well. The people who knew that it was going to happen, there were all kinds of crazy inside, trades on airline stock, from mysterious people in Saudi Arabia who made a lot of money. So,
and whether they're in the know or whether or not they created the know, which is what he does. And as a result of doing those two podcasts, the amount of negativity I got was crazy. People saying, "Oh, you're supporting Israel," and I just thought, and that sort of brings me back to this level of intimidation. Not that I feel intimidated, but the attempt to intimidate people via social media, in terms of responses and in terms of sort of just interaction, engagement.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you this: your podcast is all about uncomfortable conversations. It's about conversations which people don't want to talk about. And there will be people listening to this. How do you deal with the negativity, if at all? I mean, do you get negativity, and what do you do?
Do I get negativity, Mark? Do you know who you're talking to?
I know you do, but
I mean, some people say, sometimes when I complain about it, people say, you literally named your show Uncomfortable Conversations, and now you're complaining that people are being left uncomfortable.
But do you complain?
I don't, because I have basically left social media except as a promotional tool. So, we post clips and things there, but I don't really engage with it. And I can usually dismiss The hate as being just the deranged kind of yellings of somebody, and I sort of think if you're not upsetting somebody, then you're not really saying anything interesting. There's an old adage about journalism that journalism is something that somebody somewhere doesn't want said. Anything else is publicity or marketing, right? The whole point is that you're going to upset somebody. With this most recent bout, though, I have felt it. It's been one of the 2 or 3 hardest professional moments of my life, with my being shoved out of the ABC as one of the other big recent ones, because I felt like there are really raw feelings on both sides and people are hurting. And my team is hurting. And by my team, I just mean a lot of people who are close to me who feel like I should be carrying water for their side of things, given that I'm a member of the Jewish community. They expect that I'm going to have a certain defense of Israel. And when you try to inject nuance and you try to articulate a vision that is non-partisan or that doesn't please either tribe, I have found it more emotionally trying this time round.
As in exhausting.
As in exhausting, yeah.
It doesn't, but you don't feel traumatized. You just feel tired.
Yeah.
I mean, intellectually tired.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And a little bit traumatized, because it is difficult being my whole point with Uncomfortable Conversations, some people misunderstand the title of the show and think that I'm trying to foster intentionally uncomfortable moments in the room or make the guest feel uncomfortable, which is not the point. The point is to try to have amicable and, to whatever extent possible, comfortable conversations about issues that it's really hard not to get uncomfortable about. So, we pick subjects, whether it's race or Indigenous rights or welcomes to country or, migration or refugees or the Me Too movement or male and female relations in the workplace or LGBTQIA plus issues or trans athletes or whatever it might be, that if someone were to express a strident opinion about them at a work function or even at
or
a
a
pub,
family barbecue
or a family barbie, everyone's bum holes would pucker up a little bit and tighten. Everyone would be like, "Oh, are we going to go there?" And I try to I just had on the show one of America's foremost anti-gay parenting activists, and she goes around
anti-gay parenting activist. So she is against gay parenting.
That's right.
Yeah.
So she's a family
Mate, that's
values.
you. How the fuck did you?
Right. So for people who don't know, I'm married to a guy, and we have kids through surrogacy. And it was actually John Anderson, the former deputy PM, who's a mate of mine, who had her on his show. And he's a Christian.
He's got a podcast.
He's got a podcast.
Okay.
Yep. He's a Christian. He's a family values guy, lifelong conservative, and he's intrigued by me because I don't fit the mold of the crazy woke, super kind of captured echo chambery lefty that he thinks that I would be if I was a gay guy with a family who used to work at the ABC. And so he was like, "You should talk to this woman. Like, she's in Australia. She's preaching her, I guess her gospel of family values and how every child deserves to have its biological mother and biological father." So we sat down for 2.5 hours, Mark, and had a really amicable, heated, thoughtful, combative conversation about where she's coming from, where I'm coming from. That's my gold standard, right? That's what I want to do. And when it goes out into the world,
just before you leave that, I haven't listened to that episode, but can you just tell me how did it go? What's her point?
Her point is,
is it about child's rights?
Yes.
So, but how could a child have?
Well,
I'm going to say something, but how can
You're
a
about
child
to get
have
yourself
rights?
into a bit of trouble, Mark.
How can a child have rights? I mean,
well, no, I think it's
aren't the
legitimate to say that you could. It's not an incoherent argument to say that every child has a right to a biological mother and a biological father. I think it's...
Is that by virtue of some Bill of Rights for the United States, or is
it's
that
by virtue of her? Well, I think it's by virtue of her religiosity, but she would
her
say
ethics,
her Christian ethics. But she would say it's by virtue of the nature of the way that humankind is constructed. That you need a biological.
But it's a construct.
Yeah, but she would say it's rooted in our biology. No child has ever come into existence that didn't have a biological mother and a biological father. It's never happened. And we're now playing God in ways that are potentially damaging to the future of kids. And we're not really looking at the downsides for children.
What are the downsides? Did she sort of mention?
Well, her problem is there aren't any, really.
Yeah.
I mean, her trick, her magic trick is that, or her chess move, I should say, is to say, there's a lot of historical literature about how bad it is for kids not to have a stable home with a nuclear family.
Well, fair
So
enough.
she's talking about, she's talking about kids from broken homes. She's talking about
Yeah.
kids with step parents who beat them. She's talking about kids who, lost a parent. She's talking about, and all of that literature.
Trauma.
She then smuggles into the modern day status quo, where, from my perspective, 3 seconds ago, we developed the technological and legal ability for people like me to have kids and raise them in a home that is free from all of those downsides.
No
a
trauma.
home that is not broken, where there's no trauma, where there are loving people surrounding the kids, where the kids have all of the advantages. And there are loads of studies now that kids in same-sex households fare just as well or better by any metric that you'd want to than kids. And it makes sense because they're brought into existence by people who really want them. It's not a 16-year-old, a couple of 16-year-olds in the backseat of a car at a drive-in movie theater or something who get knocked up, and then I'm talking about Alabama here, maybe. Maybe
I remember the movie.
And then they have to keep the kid. Obviously, kids are going to do well if their parents really, really love them and spent a lot of money and effort bringing them into existence. But she makes the move of saying, we can't guarantee that the downsides that we normally associate with children from broken homes don't also apply to these children. And I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I found it. What I like about it is that I think in the past 10, 15 years or so, progressives, people on broadly my side of politics, I think of myself as a pretty left-wing guy, they have taken a very censorious and finger-wagging and holier-than-thou school-marmy attitude to everything, and they've taken a posture of, we don't need to explain to you why you should be using your putting your pronouns in your email signature. We don't need to explain to you why trans women are women. We don't need to explain to you why you need to sit through a smoking ceremony. We don't need to explain to you why you need to be welcomed to your own country at an Anzac Day dawn service. We don't need to explain to you why, as a straight white male, you're not allowed to speak up in a meeting where you feel like people are being a little bit sexist against men. Like, you should know that we're on the right side of history and you have to get in line, right? Or we're going to either hound you on social media, we're going to report you to HR, we're going to, exclude you from polite society. We're going to potentially get rid of you from the ABC.
Which is what happened to you.
Yeah. And I think that's just fundamentally misguided. If you look at all the civil rights movements that have been successful, from civil rights for African Americans in the 60s to probably the most successful civil rights movement, I think, of all time, which is the gay civil rights movement between like the 80s and the 2010s, the strategy was not, you're a bigot if you don't agree with us. The strategy was, listen, here's our perspective. We're all on the same page. We're here, we're queer, we want the same stuff you do. We want to be able to open a bank account together and have joint, access to it. We want to be able to visit our loved ones in the hospital when they're dying without being treated like a complete stranger. We want to be able to take out mortgages together. We want to not be discriminated against when we rent a house. And ultimately, we'd even like to be able to get married and have that word to endorse our relationship the same way you do. You don't have to do anything, straight people of the world. You don't have to change anything. All you have to do is just live your life and extend to us the same universal values that you enjoy for yourselves, equality. And that resonated with people. People came on board incredibly quickly. I mean, when I was born, being gay was illegal in a number of states in Australia, and the idea of gay marriage was completely ludicrous, right? That was a very fast win, and it was a durable win because we actually won. I didn't do anything, but my forefathers in the movement, won hearts and minds. They went on talk shows, they went on panels, they wrote op-eds. Contrast that to the strategy of what you might call the woke left of the past 5 or 10 years, where there's no explanation, there's no appeal to fundamental underlying values that we all share. It's just like,
do as I say.
Do as I say. And understandably now, in Trump and the far right in Europe and Elon Musk and a lot of discontent in Australia and elsewhere as well, there's a backlash. People are saying, I don't have to do what you say.
Or are they saying or are they saying, do as I say, but what I say is the opposite?
What do you mean?
Well, Trump, Musk, the right, let's call it the right.
Yeah.
Are they saying, I don't need to do what you tell me to do? Is it a backlash from
yes,
as a movement, or is it this new movement or the opposite side? Are they saying, no, we don't believe in gay rights. We don't believe in two men being married or two women being married. We don't believe in your rights relative for you having children on your own. And you should do what I say.
Well, yes, they are. Yes, you're
Which
right.
is
They are equally censorious,
Yeah.
and but this is what you get, Mark, when you have overreach.
Yeah.
Right? You provoke a backlash, and when the whole game is shut the hell up because you're not just mistaken but winnable over if I speak to you like a grown up and provide a rational space for us to have a common discussion, but you're beyond the pale. You're an enemy of civilization. You're on the wrong side of history. I have to crush you and I have to defeat you. Then, of course, that provokes the other side.
So you think it's understandable, though, Josh?
I'm saying it's understandable that you would have a ratcheting up of intensity and a kind of a cultural war of attrition where both sides think that it's a winner-take-all scenario. So you've got Donald Trump, who will basically do anything, I think, to crush his opponents, but he doesn't come out of a vacuum. He comes out of a cultural moment in the United States where a large base of middle Americans, of small C conservative middle Americans, felt like they were being talked down to and
Well, they probably were.
and shat upon, by the Hillary Clintons of the world for too long, right? So anyway, this is all a long way of saying that what I'm doing when I invite someone like this anti-family, this pro-family values, anti-gay parenting activist on the show is trying to say these topics aren't out of bounds. Nothing's out of bounds for rational conversation. If we're going to survive the 21st century, then we're only going to do so by sitting down in forums like this and exchanging ideas with people we disagree with as well as those who we agree with. And too much of our conversations at the moment, coming back to what you were saying about feeling sort of besieged and like attacked right on social media, are we sit in our silos, in our echo chambers, inside our kind of thought groups, which algorithms reinforce. They show us things that are
They think we like.
Yeah, that we're going to like. Well, even if we hate it, we still like it. We still engage with it, right? It's things that, in other words, either reinforce what we already believe or they demonize things that we don't believe. But as long as we stay on that video of the Gazan baby dying and share it or comment on it, then that's a win for Silicon Valley. And as a result, our worldviews get narrower and narrower, and it starts to feel like it would be beyond the pale to talk to somebody in good faith who disagrees with us because they're an enemy. How could you defend a Gazan baby dying? Like, how could you defend a child being ripped away from its mother or father in the case of gay marriage? How could you defend, betraying our First Nations brothers and sisters by questioning an acknowledgement of country? And so people get more and more kind of like enclosed in these thought chambers. I see my job as just expanding that by 10%, if not punching a hole in the wall altogether, so that we are all on the same page, at least, and we know the sort of the terrain of conversation that we can have with one another to try to figure out what's right and wrong and survive as a civilization. So basically, I'm Superman, is what I'm saying, Mark.
Well, actually, I know you're taking the piss out of yourself, but to be frank with you, people should listen to your podcast because, unfortunately, or fortunately, in your case, fortunately, the process of navigating your way through what you just explained so well requires a fair bit of intellect and probably more importantly, an understanding of the topic at an intellectual level, as opposed to the way most of us look at these things is we're just looking, as you say, we're looking at Instagram, we're just getting fed, or social media, we're getting fed what it knows we like, and we're too busy running our own business, and we're not really intellectualizing these things. That's your job.
I mean, maybe. Look, that is a nice way of saying that I am clever, but I actually think there's a muscle that everybody can flex. Everybody listening to this can flex, regardless of how busy they are and regardless of how uninformed they might be about a particular issue. And that muscle is, I guess, intellectual empathy. Forming a habit of giving people the benefit of the doubt and assuming the strongest version of their own case rather than immediately assuming the worst. So if you see someone write an article like the one that I did, or, post a clip like the ones that I might post on social media about something that I'm saying, we have been trained by the algorithm to take it in the worst possible faith and to either agree as wholeheartedly as possible, which is just as bad as disagreeing as wholeheartedly as possible. Like, I've got some feedback in the past month from people who think that I'm on their side, which is just as upsetting to me as the feedback from people who hate me, because I'm not, just because you're misunderstanding. I'm not on your bloody team. Don't think I've suddenly jumped ship and I'm on your team, you jihadist, Hamas supporting, clueless fool. I'm trying to not have a team. I'm trying to encourage people to think about things with the maximum amount of generosity towards ideas that don't come naturally.
Do we need to have a team?
No.
Is that the point?
That's the point.
So is tribalism emerging into our society? In other words, pick a team.
Yes, I mean,
and
I think
fight
it's
like
I think
hell?
it's natural. I think it's perfectly natural. I think we've always had it, right? People, I mean, go back to prehistory, and we all were tribes, and so we have a sense. And especially when things start feeling uncertain, you hunker into your tribe, and you circle the wagons, and you try to protect your kin. And that's a perfectly natural response, not just for Homo sapiens, but for all mammals, really, right? All clan animals. I think we did a good job of inventing the Enlightenment and liberal. Again, like I had a part in it. People invented the Enlightenment and liberal democracy and institutions like everything from the US Constitution to the Declaration for Human Rights and all kinds of things, so that for the second half of the 20th century, we understood that the main objective was to turn the volume down on tribes. You listen to Martin Luther King speak, you listen to Gandhi speak, you listen to Nelson Mandela speak. I mean, Nelson Mandela, after he was elected, after he was imprisoned, and then he got elected, right? All of the white supremacist racists who had been in the previous government said, fine, don't worry, we're not going to, we'll let you do your thing. He said, no, stay in cabinet. I want you with me. I want you guys who locked me up to be working with me, because the only way the country recovers is by us working together.
And famously upset his own crowd by wearing a Springboks jersey
Exactly.
at a Springboks game where there was not one person of colour in the side.
Right, exactly.
And courageous. People say it's courageous. Actually, I see it really clever.
Absolutely.
So smart.
Smart and brave, both. And, you just listen to Obama's speeches from, when he was emerging onto the scene. Believe it or not, it's 20 years ago now.
Wow.
He came onto the scene 21 years ago when he first gave a speech at the Democratic National Convention, which brought his name to people's attention in political circles in the States. And it was all about how there is no red America and blue America. There is no black America and white America. There are only the United States of America. I mean, I get a chill up my spine even just reciting that. It's so beautiful. And in the intervening 20 years, I think the left has just gone a bit crazy. And that's caused the right to go a bit crazy in losing sight of universalism, of this idea that the tribe actually is a bit of a dead end. You don't think about tribes. Don't judge people on the basis of their skin or their genitals or their, sexual persuasion. Try as hard as you can to judge people on the content of their character. Try to have everyone get along. Try to reduce inequality. Try to reduce prejudice. But that almost on the left now comes across as a passé right-wing excuse for inaction. Like, oh, do you think that, all of a sudden it's just fine for us not to pay any attention to, we need to have serious conversations about race and about sex and, my identity, and we have to change the rainbow flag so it's not a rainbow flag, but it now represents, First Nations, transgender,
Everyone.
Indigenous, the whole point of a bloody rainbow is that it's a rainbow. It's got everything in it. You don't need to also add in a little black thing to include. There's an obsession with tribalism and identity that I think is occluding our vision and is
It's
distracting
a new form
us.
of tribalism.
Exactly, it's an ancient instinct, and I think social media and the instability of the globe is flaring up that tribal instinct and
Out of fear?
Yes, out of fear, and out of, I think, a delusional interpretation of the way the world is through social media. People are presented with an extremified version of things because the algorithm knows that that's what they're going to spend more time on. I mean, most people who are certain one way or another about their position on big, complicated, controversial issues that we all deep down know there isn't an easy answer to. I'm talking about all of these subjects, right? Gaza, international relations, whether to bomb Iran, race relations, same-sex marriage, whatever it might be, religion. Anyone who has a strident opinion about those things was either raised in a blinkered, blinded, constrained environment and has never been able to escape that prejudice, as is often the case with highly religious people. Or they're consuming a view of the world from social media that is just sending them down a rabbit hole and is constantly reinforcing that worldview and has deranged them. I mean, you look at the social media feed of someone who thinks that Israel is blameless, and you look at the social media feed of someone who thinks that Israel is committed to committing a genocide against the Palestinians, and you're looking at two different worlds.
Well, let's talk about that. Tribes, Israel, you're Jewish.
Yeah.
You're part of, I mean, would you consider yourself as part of the Jewish community?
Yeah.
Okay. You feel strongly about perhaps the Holocaust?
Yep.
You've written an article recently about your grandmother.
Yeah.
What was the article titled?
Well, part of the problem is that the journalist doesn't write the title of
that's
a newspaper.
yeah,
article,
I forgot
right?
about that.
The sub-editor writes the title.
Well, people should know that too, by the way.
Yes, and people should be aware of that, because I think that's a large part of the misunderstanding about what I was trying to say.
But it was called, just in case you want to look it up.
Just Google, I actually don't remember, but it was called, just if you Google Szeps, SZEPS, Israel.
I'll tell them what it is. I've got it in my notes.
It was something like, my grandmother survived the Holocaust and now...
Yeah, I'm going to tell them exactly what it is. My grandmother fled the Holocaust. Now it's time for Jews to abandon Israel. Now, that's written by Josh, but he didn't put up the title, and that title is usually the case is Sydney Morning Herald.
Yeah, and The Age, yeah.
And The Age. So the Fairfax Group publish it. Usually it's someone internally who writes the headline.
That's right. The sub-editor writes the sub-editor of the newspaper writes the headline.
And it's usually to drag...
And they want to make it.
They're dragging the audience in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's fine.
And it worked.
So just to give people some background, my dad was born in a refugee camp in 1943 in Switzerland to Jewish parents who'd fled Poland just before Hitler invaded Poland. All the rest of his family and his parents' family were wiped out in concentration camps, and he was raised by staunch Lutheran foster family in the Swiss Alps for the first 2 years of the war. And then when he was 8, after living in Paris with his mum and her new boyfriend, they came out to Australia on a boat as refugees. So that's the sort of backstory to my history. I mean, I'm not a religious person. I don't go to synagogue. I'm not raising my kids Jewish. But you're part of a clan, you're part of a tribe. I relate to my Jewishness a bit like I will relate to my gayness. I sort of think it's just a thing that's that's a part of the backdrop tapestry of who I am, and I'm sort of proud of it, and I'm also sort of annoyed by it, in differing measure. And
but you don't want to be defined by it.
I don't want to be defined by it, exactly. And I'm certainly not going to carry water for other people.
Either of those, by the way.
Either.
Gayness
That's right.
or Jewishness.
Exactly.
No.
That's right. I'll be defined by the things I do.
Yep.
Right?
Or as you said earlier on, by your character.
Exactly. Yes, by my choices.
Yeah.
I'm not, this is why I also have made enemies by, I wrote also a piece, not too long ago against gay pride, or just asking for people to,
Same newspaper too, by the way.
Same newspaper. Yeah. Do we need to be proud at this stage? What are we being proud of exactly? I understand we needed to pretend to be proud when everyone thought it was a filthy perversion. We all should be proud. You don't need to be more proud than anyone else.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's right. But also, what are we being proud of? I'm not proud that I'm 6 foot. I'm not proud of being white. If I was proud of being white, we would immediately understand that that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you shouldn't be proud of being white.
But you're not embarrassed that you're white, though, at the same time.
I'm not embarrassed that I'm white, but I also think it's silly to be proud of being black or Asian or gay.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Be proud of the things you do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
Who gives a shit what identity 100%. You are? So that was my basic point. And then...
but you're not part of the Israel tribe.
I'm not part of the Israel.
You're not part of the Jewish tribe.
I am part of I am, whether I want to be or not, a guy who will be labelled as gay and a guy who will be labelled as a Jew. Right? I'd be Jewish enough to be shoveled into a concentration camp. I'd be Jewish enough for for Hitler. He's not going to be he's not going to be quibbling whether I believe I'm part of a tribe or not.
He'll put the yellow star on his throat.
I'd be straight into the gas chambers. So there's that, and then. What's happened is that I've had this sort of conflicted relationship, like a lot of Jewishians do, I think, with the state of Israel. Here's a country that...
The politics of Israel as opposed to...
Exactly.
people living there.
This is a very important distinction. Not with the Israelis and not with the existence of a country that is called Israel, but with the expectation that a lot of people in the Jewish community have that we have to only have conversations internally about our problems with Israel, and we shouldn't, that it's sort of again, the kind of the wagons, surrounding the caravan and like the hunkering down and the tribalism. Like we shouldn't air our dirty laundry about Israel to the rest of society, to non-Jewish people, because that will only give ammunition to, anti-Semitism or something. And I've been noodling on that since October 7th, since the barbaric attacks by the jihadist death cult who the
can you
Gazans
just
elected.
say, what do you think about that, Josh? So just talk about October 7th.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
let's
as
put it
a preface, yeah.
right now.
Well, it was more horrifying than the savagery of people storming across a border and like raping innocent young partygoers at a music festival who are high on ecstasy, a lot of them, and
which is what was happening on that date.
What was happening on that day? Yeah,
it has. But you're saying it had greater ramifications, or there was greater intent behind it.
Well, there was a lot. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was just to remind people, right? You've got over 1,000 people, innocent people in a pretty hippy dippy part of the country who were mostly it was a left wing part of the country. They're mostly peaceniks, and they're mostly it's a love rave, right, in a field, and these people are being raped with rifle butts and having their internal organs smeared everywhere, and just the most and with glee. Like these people are doing it with glee, right? It's not like this is a regrettable casualty
that we have to do.
That we have to do in order to achieve something on our way to attack a military installation or something. They weren't going for any military installation. They just wanted to kill lots of Jews. It was a pogrom. But what was more disturbing to me than that was that instantly, protests all over the world in support of the Palestinians who had elected this jihadist death cult, Hamas, which had then carried out this attack before Israel had done anything, right?
Well, we actually had one down here with the Opera House.
Yeah.
Literally days after it.
Yeah. With people yelling, "Where are the Jews?"
Hmm.
And then there was some misinformation that they had said, gas the Jews. And then, I got into a few arguments online with friends of mine like Antoinette Lattouf, who was saying like, no, it wasn't gas the Jews. It was where are the Jews? And I was like, excuse me for not being hugely reassured by that distinction. Why are there a bunch of Arab Muslims, rallying, screaming, where are the Jews? Do they have good intentions for me? It's not a consolation that they're not. Like, this is what I'm sort of objecting to and why I wanted to write the piece. I don't want the whole world, including Australia, to become tribalized into identity groups who feel like they have to carry water for either jihadists or the Netanyahu government. That's not my fight. That's not our fight. That's not the fight of that shouldn't be the fight of Arab Australians. That shouldn't be the fight of Muslim Australians. Certainly shouldn't be the fight of foggy-headed, lefty, well-meaning white Australians on Instagram who have no connection to the region but see images of devastation on their iPhones and think that it's now their calling to bang on constantly
and become militant.
Yeah, about how terrible Zionists are, and use the term Zionists in ways that smell to most Jews like anti-Semitic, like slander. So the point of the article was basically saying we have to find a way to talk about our Jewishness, the Jewish community, where we're not always carrying water for Israel. So when I said, if I wrote it again, honestly, Mark, I wouldn't write that. I wouldn't write it's time for Jews to abandon Israel. But as you know, when you're writing, you've got these two competing needs when you're writing. One is to be highly delicate and nuanced and explanatory and hedging everything you say so you can't possibly be misunderstood, and write in a very bureaucratic, academic way.
You get annoyed with yourself for doing that.
Yeah, and people, it's boring.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to read a thesis. Yeah. The other need you have is to have people fall off their seat and go, bloody hell, that punched me in the gut. I felt that. I really felt that.
I got half the audience.
And so, I spend 1,150 words talking about what misguided hypocrites I think that the anti-Zionist movement is, how they don't understand the history of that region. They don't understand why there's a settlement. They don't understand why, I mean, the settlements in the West Bank. They don't understand why there's an occupation. Most of them don't know about the Oslo Accords. They don't know about Yitzhak Rabin. They don't know what happened in 1967. They don't know who invaded the West Bank when Israel was created. It wasn't Israel, it was Jordan. They don't know who invaded Gaza when Israel was created. It wasn't Israel, it was Egypt. They don't understand why Israel is sitting on this land at all, because it was invaded by all of its Arab neighbors who wanted to either kill all the Jews or drive them out of the region. And then it won a military victory, which ordinarily means you get to keep the land. You don't just give it back. You don't get
That's the deal.
That's the deal. You don't get to keep invading. They invaded in 48, the Arab states, in 67, in 73. And every time they want to go, okay, we're going to wipe out all the Israelis and we're going to take back all the land for the Arabs. And then when we lose, let's just go back to the starting place. No, I'm sorry. That's not how wars work. You don't get to just keep declaring war against a people and then just say, can we have a do-over? So, there is a huge history. And then you only have to go to the 1990s and the fact that the Nobel Peace Prize went to Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres and the Palestinian leader for, really agreeing to a two-state solution. Then the Israeli PM gets assassinated, but the Israelis continue to try to figure out a way to divest themselves of these territories which they're occupying, which was supposed to be the Palestinian land. And what happens then? So they have Camp David in the year 2000, and Clinton gets together with Barak and the Palestinian leader Abbas, and they make another offer, and the Palestinians walk away, and they launch what's cutely called the Second Intifada in the year 2000, which really ramps up in the northern summer of 2001. You see posters now that say, globalise the Intifada. Have you seen that on stickers and posters and stuff? People say, globalise the Intifada, meaning the Palestinian cause is our cause. The Palestinian cause is the Indigenous Australian cause. It's about
How does that work?
It's about fighting back against the white colonialist, structural patriarchy and global capitalist hegemony of like the military-industrial complex. The colonizers. So the world is like bifurcated into these two very simple camps. You're either a colonizer, Zionist, militarist, pro-US imperialist white, or you're an innocent, blameless person of color, colonized victim. It's victim or victimizer. It's colonized or colonizer. That's the way. That's like this simplistic binary that you're supposed to accept about the world. The fact that the Arab states have been pushing Islam at the end of a sword for centuries across the Middle East, the fact that the Jews had the kingdom of King David thousands of years ago, the fact that when you dig up Israel, it's all Jewish archaeological, stuff. The fact that if anyone was doing a welcome to country in the Middle East, in Israel, it would be the Jews doing the welcome to country in Israel. This is all sort of glossed over because of the atrocities that are being perpetrated by Israel
right now.
Right now, people see that, they see a snapshot, and just as if you'd seen a snapshot of Hiroshima or the firebombing of Dresden on your phone every single day, I mean, who would you think was the good guy in World War II? If every single day,
Germany,
the Nazis,
and Japan.
The Nazis were feeding you all of the information about how horrible it was to live in Dresden. I mean, how would you continue to support that sort of a campaign? So there's this lack of historical, the Second Intifada, just to stop on the point of Intifada, because, a lot of people don't know this. 1st of June 2001, vast majority of Israelis are behind the peace process, which has now been dragging on for 7, 8, 9, about 10 years of trying to figure out a way to give the West Bank and Gaza back to the Palestinians and create a state. And the major stumbling block is the question of the right of return of Palestinians, right? The UN, when they set up, remember, end of the Second World War, countries are being created all over the joint. Refugees are all over the place. My grandparents are kicked out of, Poland, kicked out of Europe. They come and set up life here. Huge flows of people. The Jews are being kicked out of all the Arab countries in the Middle East, and they're going to Israel because they're hoping that the country's going to be created, and it gets created. And there's a bit for Israel, and then to the east of that, there's the West Bank and Gaza for the Arab population. They weren't called Palestinians yet. They invented that nationality after, they were dispossessed from their land. And that was where the Arabs go. And then about a fifth of the population of Israel proper remain Arabs. They're Arab Israeli citizens, right? They enjoy equal rights to the rest of. They're probably the best treated Arabs in the world.
These are Arabs living in
It's
Israel.
the Arabs living in Israel. You know, if I suddenly click my fingers and said, all right, you're now an Arab, and you don't know whether you're going to be rich or part of a royal family. You're just going to be an average citizen, right? You're just going to you're going to roll the dice, and you could be anywhere in society at any level. You could either be poor or rich or whatever. You can have
Based on
no
merit.
status, whatever. You get to choose to be anywhere in the Middle East.
Israel's a place.
I mean, you're not going to choose. You're not going to go to an Arab state.
No, Israel.
Yeah, of course.
Well, most people, and that, by the way, it's lost on most people. Most people don't realise that Israel treats the Arabs who live there well.
Absolutely. They're equal
Actually,
citizens.
I want to reframe it. It's not like they're treating them well. Just there's no treating well and no treating bad.
Yeah, they're just free citizens in a liberal democracy that's rich and innovative. Yeah. So what do you do about the Arabs that are surrounding the place? Well, the instant Israel gets created, instead of allowing the Arabs to form their own state, Jordan invades the West Bank and goes, we'll take that. And by the 60s, what is now the West Bank is like a third of Jordan's economy and population. It's like a big thriving part of Jordan. And Egypt is sitting on the Gaza Strip. So the reason initially why there was no Palestine was because the Arab states didn't want there to be, because they wanted to keep the land for themselves. Then they got a bit greedy and tried to take over Israel completely in 1967. And unfortunately for them, Israel won back those territories and then was like, well, what do we do with them now? And everyone in Israel basically thought we're going to have to help them create a Palestinian state at some point. The problem was, every time they tried to broach the topic of creating a Palestinian state, every single Palestinian leader, including up until today, found it impossible to say that they don't have a right to go back to Tel Aviv and the original places where some of them came from. Some of them were born and raised in the West Bank. Some of them were born and raised in Gaza. But many of them can trace their ancestry back to what is now Israel proper. And as far as Israel is concerned, that's not a fair deal. 1948 was a weird time. It was a long time ago. So yeah, a lot of Palestinians are hanging around with like a key it's a thing in Palestine to have a key hanging on a necklace around your neck to the house that your great-great-grandparents came from in what is now some Israeli town, saying like, someday I'll be able to return. And
it's really romantic.
It's very romantic, and it's really sad. And my heart goes out to the Palestinian people. I mean, I am as devastated as anybody about how badly they've been screwed. I just disagree with the mainstream Palestinian narrative that the main cause of their being screwed is Jews. The main cause of their being screwed is the dysfunctional way that the Arab world has continued to inflame the Palestinian right of return, that someday we will go back to the sea, the Jews won't be here anymore. This kind of, a lot of Arab autocrats and the Arab street and the jihadists and the Iranian theocrats have a vested interest in promoting, in whipping up this kind of anti-Semitic.
What is the vested interest?
It bonds them together. Yep. It gives them a common enemy, and it absolves them of the responsibility to do anything for the Palestinians.
Right.
They don't have to allow. Qatar just hosted the World Cup, right, a couple of years ago. Who built all the stadiums? They shipped in people from Bangladesh to build the stadiums. Why don't they let Palestinians come and build the stadiums and send some money back home?
Well,
they don't want to.
Why do you think that?
Because they don't like. I mean, the sad truth is, the Arab Gulf states don't like the Palestinians. They think they're jihadists. They think they're trouble. They think they're lazy. They think they're dysfunctional, and they don't see a future in them. They see a future in oil money, tourism, opening up to the world, and ideally, eventually, being on the same side as Israel and the United States. They want to back winners. They want to back the strong horse. The problem is the Arab street can't contemplate that. So the Arab leaders who are playing a double game, right? The Arab leaders in the Gulf states and in Saudi Arabia, their attitude is keep talking a big game about how much we care about Palestinians, but don't give them any work visas to come and work here and send money back to their families in Gaza or the West Bank. Don't allow them to get citizenship or permanent residency in places like Lebanon, where tons of these refugees currently live, and they're stateless. They can't even travel, Mark. You know, I've met people in Lebanon who you ask them what nationality they are, and they say Palestinian. They have a Palestinian ID card, but they're not Lebanese. They don't have a passport, And as far as they're concerned, when they say they're Palestinian, they've never been to the town that their great-great-grandparents came from. Their parents have never been there. Their grandparents have never been there. And sometimes their great-grandparents have never been there. But their home, deep in their heart, is still this town in what is now Israel proper. And they've been sold a lie by Arab leaders and by international aid organizations and by well-meaning lefties around the world for 60 years that someday they will be able to return. And so the pickle that Israel has found itself in, which it was trying to address, is like, we get this bit of land, you get that bit of land. We don't get to come and live in the West Bank or like Gaza if you don't get to come and live in Israel. Like, it's supposed to be two countries. And the inability to find a way to divest itself of the West Bank and Gaza has now led Israel into what I think is this moral abyss, where it is running a military occupation in the West Bank, humiliating and degrading Palestinians. It continues to build settlements, meaning towns, just constructs Jewish towns on what is supposed to be Palestinian land, which is hardly a show of good faith that you're actually serious about a two-state solution. And now it has taken the most brutal and militaristic approach to addressing the problem of having jihadists, of having essentially terrorists running the enclave in Gaza, where there seems to be no care for human life whatsoever or no proportionality. Now,
It seems that, or you think that is the case?
well, look, I understand how tricky it is to talk about, because as far as the Israelis are concerned, look,
Israelis or Israel?
Israel. As
Israel.
far as Israel is concerned.
The administration.
But I would have to say that now they are almost indistinguishable. I mean, I would say that 90% of the Israeli population is on board with the view I'm about to articulate, even if they don't agree with the Netanyahu government. They would say there used to be Israeli towns in Gaza. There used to be settlements. And we withdrew in 2005. And there was no blockade. Israel was not stuffing around with Gaza at all. There was a full unilateral withdrawal. They ripped out, the army went in and ripped out screaming Jews from Gaza in order to say, you know what, we're done. Have it. Take it. Do what you want with it, guys. We're over having a military occupation. And that was a test case for the West Bank. For a lot of people in the Israeli government at the time, in 2004, 2005, who thought the way we're going to do this is we'll withdraw from Gaza, and as long as that works, we'll just unilaterally withdraw from the West Bank, and we won't keep waiting for them to accept our right to exist. They're never going to do it. They're never going to come around. Just build a big wall, live side by side. The problem was the Prime Minister of Israel had a stroke and wasn't able to completely fulfill that. And the other problem was it was after 9/11. George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State in the United States, were big on empowering the Arab world to be more democratic. They wanted a shake-up of the Arab world. They thought the problem was too many Arab dictators. And so they were like, let's empower the Gazan people by giving them a vote for who they want to rule them. And the Israelis were like, don't do that. They're going to just vote in a bunch of assholes who want to kill everybody. And they were persuaded otherwise by the international community and by the US. Let's create a democratic Gaza. Well, the Gazans voted for terrorists.
They voted for Hamas.
Yeah, for Hamas. And once you've got this fully, I don't want to mince words here. People should not understand Hamas as anything other than an incredibly, ragingly Jew-hating, murderous, genocidal death cult. I mean, this is not some people sort of think, well, it's sort of like Nelson Mandela or something. Like, it's a liberation struggle. Yes, it's that.
It's not the PLO.
It's not the PLO. I mean, it is, of course, it is fueled by the frustrations of a people who yearn for freedom. But their freedom has not been deprived by Israel over the past, since 2005. Their freedom has been deprived by the terrorists who are holding them hostage and by the Arab states, especially Qatar, who empower that. And I'll add by the cynicism of the Netanyahu government in facilitating that, because it sort of suited Israel's right-wing government to have Hamas in power in Gaza, because it gave them an excuse to not pursue peace, right? They were like, well, we're not going to go negotiate with terrorists. Yeah.
Because we're at war, no election.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, of course they're not going to have Hamas would never allow elections anyway.
No, but I'm also in Israel. So,
I see what you mean.
because
Yeah.
Netanyahu's sort of security's position.
Yeah. I mean, well, exactly. I mean, he'll have the elections that he's required constitutionally to have, but he doesn't have to. He can call them at the time of his choosing
Yeah.
when it's when it suits him the best. So this is all a long rambling way of saying that once you've got the death cult in charge, then Israel imposes a blockade because you can't have people who are obviously committed to. I mean, they start getting Gaza starts getting money from the international community, and what does its government do with it? It doesn't build. It could have built Singapore with the amount of money it's gotten. It could have built high rises. It could have made itself a technology hub. Could have done anything with it. What does it do? It builds the largest tunnel network in the world that it doesn't allow civilians into, that only allows its military into, and then uses its civilians as human shields and pawns. So, again, this is a long roundabout way of saying they've rigged the game, the Palestinian government in Gaza, such that anything that Israel does to get rid of them is going to make Israel essentially guilty of genocide in the eyes of the world. Like, if your own government is committed to killing as many innocent people as possible in order to stay in power, then you've basically booby-trapped the system such that your adversary has to do horrendous things in order to get you out of power. And the tragedy is that Israel is doing those things. Like, I don't know whether or not you can classify it as war crimes or genocide or whatever. To me, there's a legalistic way that you can say that Israel is guilty of genocide, but by that yardstick, Hiroshima was genocide. Lots of things that the West has done. Vietnam was genocide. There were, because like genocide technically under international law, I think is just the whole or partial, like prevention of a people from being able to exist as a people. So if you think of the Gazans as a people, you'd have to say that that's the case, right? Their lives are being rendered intolerable to live as Gazans. But if, as many Israelis see it, you see the Gazans as a shat upon rump of the wider Arab world, and there are 500 million Arabs living in the Middle East and just a few million Jews, then it's obviously not a genocide. Like, I spoke to one Israeli former member of parliament on my show, and she was like, when it'll be like a genocide? When there are 500 million Jews and only a few million Arabs. Like, the population of Arabs and the population of Gazans, the population of the West Bank, of Palestinians in general, is continuing to grow and grow and grow. And I think when the layperson hears the word genocide, what they think it means, and what I think it morally means, is the intentional attempt to wipe out an ethnic group, but to wipe it out. And I don't think that's what Israel is doing. But I also don't think that as a Jewish Australian, I should be expected to keep making excuses for a state that I think has become deranged by its own predicament.
As in Israel.
Yeah.
And well, can I just go back on the Gazan Hamas differentiation? How do you reconcile that? And this is a part of the narrative, but innocent Gazans, innocent, let's call it Palestinians, who have nothing to do with Hamas, but nothing to do with the ruling party, are being killed whilst Israel is trying to get rid of Hamas as the reigning sort of group within Israel. I mean, how do we reconcile that now? I get the fact that Israel wants to get rid of Hamas. I get it, because as you said, it seems to me that they're a terrorist organization and they're intent on one thing alone, that's wiping out Israel, or wiping out Jews generally, and Israel, I guess, too. But at the same time, there are Gaza, people live in Gaza who've got nothing to do with any of that. At what point do we say that Israel's gone too far?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, isn't it? That is the question. I don't know the answer to that. But, you start wars, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, Mark.
Yeah.
You start a war, then your people die.
But you do see the unfairness, because a lot of people in Palestine, or a lot of Gazans at the time, wouldn't even know that October 7th was going to happen. That they weren't warned.
No, that's true. That's why I'm so sympathetic to many. I mean, I'm conflicted in two ways, right? On the one hand, I think that Gazans are basically hostages to a jihadist death cult, hostages to the cynicism of Arab autocrats, hostages to the whole notion of jihadism as it's sort of perpetrated by the same kinds of forces that gave rise to ISIS, and a lot of this is linked back to Iran and the theocracy there. And hostages of international the international community have always found Israel a bit unseemly in a way that they single it out for. Like the United Nations has more resolutions against Israel than any other country in the world. I
Wow.
think than the next, 10 or something combined. Like, do we actually believe that it's actually more worthy of censure than North Korea and Saudi Arabia? I mean, come on, what's going on
Is
here?
this
Like, there's a
big?
yeah, and nothing it's done is even remotely approaches the atrocities of the next, worst 50 countries, who aren't censored. So, Israelis smell a rat. On the question of like how many dead babies is too many dead babies, I kind of think it's the wrong framing in the sense that I think that implicit in the question about this, at least for me in the early stages of the war, is a belief that the Palestinian people, through their views, their community, their elected representatives, their arguments on the global stage, were deeply, deeply wronged by Israel, only wanted peace with Israel, and were predictably going to do something outrageous in order to break out of the sort of open air prison that Gaza had become. And if you start from that starting point, then I would sort of say that almost no civilian casualty is worth, the price. At the time, I was arguing that Israel should have done something like moved the entire population of women and children into the southern part of Israel, or maybe into the Sinai, where Egypt is, and create a huge humanitarian zone where they could be well treated, and then any military age male who remains in Gaza either
Good luck.
vet them and let them out, and forget about the hostages. They're done. Sorry, you're not gonna. This is the last time we bend over backwards and reward you for taking our hostages. This is it. It ends here, and just flood the tunnels or something. Just like go full. There are strategies you can imagine that would have avoided the amount of ongoing constant carnage that I think has been reputationally terrible and morally abysmal. But if you flip the script and you see Palestinians not as innocent, here's an interesting thing, Mark. Tim Minchin said this to me actually on my show. Notice who we give sympathy to, and notice who we give agency to, and it'll tell you a lot about our own prejudices and biases.
That's interesting.
Notice who we give sympathy to and notice who we give agency to, because we often overdo it. If there's a brown, poor person standing amid rubble, we give them all the sympathy and none of the agency. And if there's a white guy in a fancy suit speaking perfect English who was educated at an American university and who's in charge of a lot of expensive bombs, we give him all the agency and zero sympathy. And that's a fudge. Yes, the Palestinian child, it does not deserve to be in the situation they are in.
So we give them
But
sympathy.
their uncles and their grandparents have been complicit, or at least been manipulated by people who are complicit, in a refusal to accept that any Jews have a right to a country in the Middle East, a country that was established under international law at a time when it was perfectly legitimate for them to live in the boundaries where they were. And we've split ourselves into these two kind of narratives where imagine, like, just to sort of try to amp up our sympathy for the people who most Australians regard as being the villains in this, which is the Israelis. Imagine you bend over backwards in the 90s with a large majority of your population really wanting a Palestinian state, which they did. And the response you get is what's called the Second Intifada, which is, I think it was 1,500 drive-by shootings in the space of a single year. So every other day, you've got a bomb or a drive-by shooting in your country at a time when you thought that you were on track for a peace process. On the June the 1st in 2001, the first bomb was at this nightclub on the beach, which was mostly high school students. That's the other thing. They were mostly targeting kids because they knew that would be the pressure point, the pain point. So imagine you're a parent who, with 15 or 16-year-old kids, and they're out in Fitzroy in Melbourne or in Newtown in Sydney or in Fremantle in Perth, and the pub that they're in has a Bali bombing style bomb, and that happens 2 days later, and that happens 2 days after that. How many weeks or months of that do you need before you go, hang on, why are we doing the peace thing? What do they want? What is this all about? I thought we were talking to each other about, oh, they don't want peace at all. They're timing these bombings to coincide with the peace talks because they want the whole enchilada. And that's a popular position in Palestine. It's a very popular position in the Arab world. And it's an increasingly popular proposition in Australia and the West. That Israel is a shitty little country that shouldn't exist at all, basically. It's kind of a colonial project, and it was the Palestinians' land all along. So if you're an Israeli, like, can we understand why they would elect a shitty little government like Netanyahu's? And, you know, they even went back to the drawing board after the second intifada, and they tried. In 2008, there was the biggest, most generous offer that Olmert put on the table. And the Palestinians wouldn't take it because it didn't involve Palestinians moving en masse back into Israel and swamping the Jewish population because their great-great-great-grandparents lived there. Like, do the Jews get a right of return if they left Iraq in the 40s? Do the Jews get a right of return to Syria? Do the Jews get a right of return to Poland? The only people who get a right of return back to the places where their ancestors were displaced from in this Palestinian worldview are the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, who get to demolish Israel basically demographically by coming in their millions and millions and millions. What country in the world would tolerate that kind of refugee resettlement? What the Israelis want, understandably, is their country and a Palestinian country. Now, I am super critical of Israel for being disingenuous about pursuing that, for having been conflicted about it, for maintaining a brutalizing military occupation in the West Bank, for continuing to build towns in the West Bank that make it seem like they're not really committed to a two-state solution, for the brutality of the blockade on Gaza, which was understandable because a death cult was in charge, and for the way they're prosecuting the war. And the point of my article was to say, we as a Jewish community have to be free from bullshit and brave in saying, this state is not our state. It's not my state. It's not the state that my grandmother envisioned. It's not a state that's living up to the aspirations of what it means to be Jewish, to me. It's a state that has fallen into paranoia, bitterness, and dehumanization. But it is a state that has a right to exist, and it is a state that is in a part of the world that persistently refuses to accept that right. And it is a state that is dealing with neighbors who it is occupying, who have persistently, with one voice, insisted that they have a right to come back to where their great-great-grandparents were born, a right that nobody else in the world gets. And so it's a bit bloody rich, I feel, for us to be dividing up our own society, for Jewish Australian parents to be worried about their children waiting at the bus stop because they could be identified as going to a Jewish school, for my dad's nursing home to have put up big new security fences and bollards.
Oh, really?
In the past 12 months, because some deranged jihadist might drive a truck bomb into a bunch of old Holocaust survivors.
You're saying that's paranoia, or you don't?
No, I think that's legitimate.
Legitimate.
I think there is legitimate concern. I like that. This is how toxic it has become. And I'm proud that I'm a member of a community where I can speak out and write a piece like I did, saying, this Israel doesn't speak for me. Where are the pieces by the Arab Muslim Australians saying that the Palestinian cause doesn't speak for them, that Hamas doesn't speak for them, that the idea of eradicating Israel doesn't speak for them?
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that no one's come out equally?
Because of the tribalism factor that we were talking about before.
Are they more strongly tribal than, say, the Jewish?
Yes, I do. I think so. Yeah, I think Muslims as a rule, and I'll get a lot of shit for saying this, I think that the Muslim community as a rule, it tends towards more conservatism and tends towards closing ranks, and has been too apologetic for dysfunctional systems of government and for jihadism and for Islamism over the past 20 or 30 years. You know, there's been a kind of like, well, it's not our problem, it's got nothing to do with us. Well, you know, major Muslim institutions from Saudi Arabia have been spreading their version of Salafist Islam right throughout the world across the, you know, this kind of Wahhabi extremism, even across places like Indonesia. And I would like it if members of the community were more willing and more open to say, like, no. The things that are getting preached in Lakemba Mosque about, white people and Jews being pigs and Americans being imperialist Nazis, that's ridiculous. And so I'm just trying to do my bit by saying, like, we have to find a way of talking about our ethnic communities in the diaspora in places like Australia that does not hitch us to the wagon of other countries or other agendas overseas. Do not import that kind of toxicity here. Like, this is our country. Let's all get along with it, and don't expect the Jewish community to endure, pain, discrimination, and very real threats of violence. I mean, very real threats of anti-Semitic, Jew-hating violence, which people delusionally think is directed against Zionism, colonialism, imperialist aggression, but is really sort of the latest incarnation of an ancient distaste for the Jew.
Do you think that's because one side, let's call it the Jewish side, are much more distant through generations away from Israel, and the other side is not as distant? In other words, they might have a parent here who's just come in from one of those countries that are anti-Israel. Do you think there's something just to do with the sequence of time?
Interesting. Could be. Also, I think the Israel thing is like the Jewish community. It's the oldest enduring ethnicity in the West, right? 5,000 years.
But more not from a physical.
No, I understand
presence.
what you're saying, but the point that I'm making is Israel's existed for 80 years, less than 80 years, right? So
67,
Jews.
67.
No, Israel existed in 48, and then
48.
67 they took over Palestine, right? When they were invaded. So the Jews have had 98 point something % of their history with no Israel. I mean, there was the ancient kingdom and all this sort of stuff like in prehistory. But I mean, Jews are very familiar with not carrying water for Israel because it didn't exist for 98% of Jewish history. But I don't think that Muslims and Arabs have learned the skill of distancing themselves from the ideas of Arab nationalism and Muslim liberation that emerged in the 20th century. Like, these are reasonably recent things. Like, this kind of extremist, you go back a couple of centuries and Muslims weren't extremists. There's nothing intrinsic to Islam that is extreme. But I think partly as a result of oil and, partly as a result of colonialism and whatever you want to attribute it to, there is a major dysfunction. Anyone who denies there is a major dysfunction in the way that the Arab Muslim world articulates its sense of self is kidding themselves. I mean, this is the other thing about a Palestinian state. What Arab Muslim state are we thinking this Palestinian state will look like that's going to be so great for Palestinians? Most anti-Zionists can't answer that question for me. Point me to this great, well-functioning state that's as rich and liberal and democratic as Israel, that's great for gays, that's great for women. Where is this place? And so we're going to create one more failed Arab Muslim state, which is probably going to become a proxy for Iran. It would almost certainly just become a place for Iranian meddling, the way the south of Lebanon is, and it would become a Hezbollah and Hamas stronghold. So yeah, they deserve a state, absolutely. But let's not be dewy-eyed about how magnificent everything would be if only Israel would get the hell, would.
But what's
get
the
hell out
solution
of
to
there.
this, Josh? I mean, I'm not suggesting you have the solution, but
Well, I'm glad you asked because I
where
have a
does this all end up?
5-point plan. No, I don't.
No, but where does it all end up? I mean, for Australians, I'm talking about. No, not there.
Right,
Here.
right, yeah.
Because we are talking about here. So,
Yeah.
like, what do we do? Is it politicians need to intervene? I mean, I know you've intervened, but
Well, yes, I've intervened.
You
I would have
started it.
liked. I would have liked to see stronger remarks about anti-Semitism earlier, after October 7th, just to make it crystal clear from the Albanese government. You'll notice something interesting. When we talk about about other forms of bigotry or prejudice or violence, we don't feel the need to add on a whole bunch of other forms of hate. But when people talk about anti-Semitism, they never put a full stop after it. when people say, like, you remember the nurses who got into trouble for being on that Zoom call where they were, they were talking about how if a Jew came in, they
in Israel,
in Sydney, and they were
Sydney.
talking to an Israeli.
Yeah, they're talking to an Israeli
And they
journalist.
were saying,
social media guy.
Yeah, if a Jew came in, we wouldn't treat him. In fact, Jews have come in and we've sent them to hell. So right after that, a parade of politicians at a state and federal level came out and said there is absolutely, and the Nurses Association also released a statement saying there is no place in Australian society for anti-Semitism or any other form of anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Arab. And I'm like, hang on a second. If someone had been caught saying, I want to kill all the Muslims, I wouldn't treat a Muslim, would you come out and say, and this suppose it's it's a neo-Nazi, right? Kill all the Muslims. He's obsessed with Muslims. That's his one focus. It's all he cares about. He doesn't talk about any other ethnicity. He's just going in on the Muslims. Would they come out and say there is no place in our society for hatred against Muslims or Jews? Of course they wouldn't.
No.
Of course they wouldn't. There's a tacit understanding, I think, in polite society throughout the West, that there's something a little bit fishy about the bloody Jews. And there's certainly something a bit fishy about that bloody nuisance state of Israel, always, doing shit that we don't want it to and being mean to the Palestinians. You go to the Middle East, you talk to Palestinians, talk to Arabs, talk to Jews, talk to Israelis. They are all much more on the same page about the nature of the problem than we are in Australia. Like, I've spoken to Arab Israelis who were born in Palestine who are now Zionists because they're like, you don't get us. Like, you don't understand us. We are a very complicated, meaning the Arabs. You don't understand us Arab Palestinians. Like, we are a very complicated bunch and we won't take yes for an answer. And we have to be sort of massaged in a way. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that the conversations that they're having there are a lot more nuanced and sophisticated than this silly binary that we have over here where we try to superimpose all of our own white colonial historical guilt onto them. I mean, what's basically happened since October 7th, I think, in countries like Australia and the United States is white, well-meaning people have taken the burden of colonialism that they feel guilty about.
And we're now very virtuous about it all.
Yeah, in relation to our own Indigenous people, in relation to our own conflicted relationship to the British Empire and its misdeeds. And we're just superimposing that template onto a part of the world that we have no bloody idea how it's working because it's complicated and messy, and there have been Jews and Arabs floating around that neck of the woods, bumping into each other. They know each other so well, so much better than anyone of us knows them. Let them sort it out. It's their problem. That's the point I was trying to make in my piece. Israel is for Israelis. It's not for the Jews of the world to make excuses for. Palestinians and Arabs, they can all sort it out, okay? Don't allow the plight of one minority community of Arabs in the Middle East, the Palestinians, who've been shat upon 6 ways from Sunday by everybody, by Arab states who won't give them visas, who won't give them permanent residency, who continue to bolster Hamas and jihadists. Let them sort that out. You don't have a duty as an Arab Australian to be defending jihadists over there. You don't have a duty as an Arab Australian to be standing up against your Jewish compatriots and fellow Australians because those Jews are somehow proxies for a state that they've never been to and don't have any control over abroad. The last thing we want is to become a huge multicultural warring group of factions all representing our international obligations on the streets of Australia with some well-chosen bombed synagogues or sucker punches to, people because of their ethnicity. Multiculturalism has worked really well in Australia. Let's not screw it up by getting too obsessed about what's going on overseas.
What do you think why do you think we get obsessed by what's going on overseas in that particular region? We don't have marches and protesters and lots of media around what's going on in, say, places of Africa.
I think because of the colonialism thing. I think because of what I was just saying, which is that, I think there are two big reasons. One is what I was just saying, which is that it's a very neat template, I think.
It's sort of easier to understand.
It's much easier to understand, right?
Yeah.
poor brown-skinned person,
Yeah.
poor brown-skinned people were living there, doing their thing. Everything was idyllic. And then parachuting in from Europe were all these white Jews who came in and pushed them out and then were mean to them. Now, this is completely ahistorical. Most of the Jews in Israel are from the Middle East. They were kicked out of other Arab states, and they're from that neck of the woods. This was not a colonial project like the British in Africa or
It wasn't
India
the
or
Polish
something.
turning up and taking control of the joint.
Well, exactly.
They're coming in from Turkey and Israel,
Yeah, they're
Armenia,
coming in
and all sorts of places.
from that area,
The
and they were
region.
coming to a place
I've
that
got
they
mates who
had
came
been
in
in
there.
for thousands and thousands
Yep.
of years. So it wasn't traditional colonialism.
I
that
got
way,
mates who
but-
coming from Georgia and Armenia and etc.
Right.
Their families went in
Right, exactly.
right next door.
So, I mean, in other words, it was a colonial, people will often say, well, they even talked about it as a colonial project. Yeah, colonialism meant a slightly different thing in the 30s and 40s. It just sort of meant a benign, to the early Zionists, it meant a benign way of reclaiming the territory of their ancestors and creating something beautiful out of it. And they did create something incredible. I mean, it's amazing. To create this rich, democratic, technologically advanced country in a part of the world that is not renowned for that. Now I've just lost track of where I was going. What did you just ask me?
I said, why don't we talk
Oh yeah, so
about
there's
Africa?
So there's that component. It's quite easy for us to look at that and go, oh well, that rhymes with all of the colonial crimes that we've been complicit
Yeah,
in.
we can
So
compartmentalize it.
we understand, rich white guy in suit with bombs, bad.
Yep.
Poor black person in rubble, or brown person in rubble, good. That's simple. And when we get to Africa, it's much more complicated. Hang on, they're all black, they're all fighting each other,
But why aren't
they're
we
all
sort of saying something
enslaving
about
each other.
China going into Africa? Why aren't we talking about that manipulation, that process?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the second thing that I was about to point to is the way that social media algorithms work and the way that people with vested interests in this are able to rig social media. Let me just make one point here. You remember during when ISIS was a big thing in the war on terror,
Yep.
and Syria was collapsing, and so there was the first thing I remember going viral was the beheading of the Wall Street Journal
I remember
journalist
Yep.
Daniel Pearl, beheaded live online. Then they started getting good jihadists at understanding social media, much better than clumsy governments like Israel's government and the United States, where everything has to go through some marketing department or whatever. And this came to the sort of apotheosis of this, the ultimate incarnation that I can remember was those downed American pilots that they dressed up in orange jumpsuits. This is really ingenious, right? They would capture an American pilot, and this was a time when Guantanamo Bay was very controversial, and there were inmates, who were alleged jihadists who were dressed in orange jumpsuits at Gitmo. They ordered online. ISIS ordered orange jumpsuits, dressed up the American pilots in them, locked them in cages in the desert, sprayed them with petrol, and ignited them. And we watched American pilots burning in cages in the desert, dressed up as Guantanamo Bay detainees. That's ingenious and evil and that's villainous, but really shrewd, right? As far as manipulating public opinion, it suddenly makes Americans go, holy hell, is there a comparison between what they're doing and what we're doing in Guantanamo Bay? Who are these people? It's shocking. And there are deep connections between ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They talk to each other. Sometimes these are the same people. They go back and forth. So why are we focused a lot on Gaza? It's not entirely an accident. Every image that comes out of Gaza is tacitly approved by a jihadist terrorist group that is the government of Gaza, which has deep ties to ISIS style, and a lot of sort of DNA and experience from jihadist groups. Some people say, oh, well, they're not approving every image that comes out of Gaza. You can't dismiss all of the images that come out of Gaza. I'm not saying all the images are manufactured, the atrocities there. What I'm saying is, if there was an image coming out of Gaza that showed the world that it's not quite as bad everywhere in Gaza, and that maybe the Israelis are taking some care with some people, or that there are letter drops from airplanes, which there have been, or door knocks to make sure that civilians are out of the building, how long do you think that citizen journalist would last at the hands of Hamas if that material was getting out? So it's not that everything's fake, but it's that everything's one-sided. right? And they're much better at playing that game of manipulating global opinion than the Israelis are. The Israelis are terrible at it. I mean, something people should understand is there's actually quite a long-standing Jewish philosophy that you don't explain yourself to other people. They're never going to understand. It's this kind of paranoid Jewish thing of like, you know what? Don't waste your breath. Like, they're going to say they give a shit about you, and then when it comes to crunch time, they're going to turn their backs on you, and they're not going to allow the boats full of Jewish refugees after the Holocaust to come and land in America anyway, and you're going to have to go back and you'll all be gassed. Spare yourself the hassle. Just go and bomb Iran on your own.
They're pathetic at marketing.
Yeah, terrible at
the
marketing.
cause.
Terrible at marketing. They're obstinate people. Like, and so is Israel. You know, they're just like, they're clueless about it. So why do we care so much about Gaza and we don't care about the Chinese in Africa? A, we don't see anything on our screens about the Chinese in Africa.
So it's not marketed.
Yeah, it's not marketed. B, the Africans aren't any good. I mean, there's nobody with a vested interest to make that a big issue, right? There's no equivalent of the mullahs in Tehran or, you know, the leaders of Hezbollah who want to make that an issue. And 3, it's complicated and difficult for us to understand, and it's difficult. We wouldn't spend a lot of time hovering over a video of that if it came up on as an Instagram reel. It'd be like, wait, who are they? What are they doing? Maybe they it doesn't fit into that neat template. So I think it's a sort of perfect storm. It's like the perfect media story for people who aren't terribly well informed about the issue to feel passionate and virtuous about.
Well, and I think this has been for me, I haven't said much today because, I mean, apart from having unbelievable talent sitting here, but you're an encyclopedia of this whole region. And I think this is a perfect explanation of, at an intellectual level, of the arguments. Arguments, I'm saying in plural. Not one in favour, one against, just the arguments. And I'd say to anybody listening to this today, thank you for listening, but I'd say, well, equally, get onto Josh's podcast, Uncomfortable Conversations, and just go through the episodes and find something in there that might suit you, because this is the sort of stuff that we here in Australia, we've got to resist being pushed by the traditional media to take sides.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of partisanship in the mainstream press.
And not just, by the way, on what's going on there, on over there, but in relation to all these things that we've been trying to be divided on.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
You know, and we didn't get time to talk about Trump and or Musk, etc. But that maybe we leave that for another day.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I should say, since you're directing people to Uncomfortable Conversations, if you're interested specifically in this subject and you want to hear me wrestling in real time with how I felt in the aftermath of October 7th, then in December of 2013, I did like an hour and a half long monologue, which was like one of the most passionate and heartfelt and I think articulate ways that I've ever done of trying to flesh through a complicated issue.
Date again.
It was in December of 2013, and it was called "Why Jews Are Literally Nazis."
Wow.
I had wanted to
You picked your own headline.
I picked my own headline then. I wanted to name half the episodes "Why Jews Are Literally Nazis" and the other one "Why Muslims Are Literally Terrorists," but you would get the same episode. But I couldn't figure out technologically how to release the same episode, but just to show people how binary and stupid we were all being, and how like you click on one because that reinforces your belief. But Jews aren't Nazis and Muslims aren't terrorists. We're all people.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to go back and listen to that myself. Thanks, mate. Good on
Thank
you,
you.
Josh.
Great to be here.